Good morning once again, and it's my pleasure to have you all here. I will start with Professor Frederick Iraki to give us the opening address for the Hub of Africa. Professor Iraki, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. On behalf of myself and the Harmony Institute that I represent, I would really wish to wish everybody a Happy New Year and a very prosperous year too. It's my pleasure to just make a few remarks in regard to this very critical and crucial meeting. It's coming at the right time when we are all asking ourselves very serious questions about even the nomenclature of talking about that we have many races in the world. We are actually acting in a way that is counter-scientific. Science is proving more and more that we are one race. There's only one human race. There are not many human races. And this is a time for us now to really come out and in our own dialogues, embrace science also in our conversation about peace. It's a good perspective to understand that we are one humanity. And so we stop in our religious or interreligious conversations talking about human races. There's only one human race. The second point I wanted us to discuss was in terms of creating world peace, we need to anchor it somewhere, and I'm very happy about the African conversation. We need to anchor it around spirituality as opposed to religion. The point I'm making here is very important because if we continue having conversations between what we call established religions, that is the Abrahamic faiths, the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, and all this, we are missing the point. We need to also, as Africans, start interrogating African spirituality. And there's a good reference here. A lot of work was done in the 70s by John S. Mbiti when he talks about African philosophies and religions. And this is very important that we start reflecting that African spirituality can also inform our conversations and dialogue as we talk about interfaith conversations to promote peace in the world. So let's go back also to our African roots and look at some very important values of spirituality that can also inform our dialogue as we move forward. When we talk about peace, and peace has to come hand in hand with economic development. Because when people are poor and you're telling them about stop fighting, respect each other, it's very difficult. Once people have been deprived materially, and this is also coming from African spirituality, when people are deprived materially, they become less human. When you're less human, you actually lose your capacities for reasoning, capacities for dialogue, because you're already less human. So as we talk about dialogue, let's look at peace and connect it directly to economic empowerment of our people. At the Harmony Institute, we try to empower vulnerable people. We try to dig boreholes for them to bring them up. We try to give them skills and give them a bit of equipment to help them wajimudu kimaisha, help them to have survival skills. This is critical. And as we talk about peace, let's talk about economic activities that can empower our people. And this is what can bring us to some level of justice. I'm so delighted that you are talking about peace in the context of Africa. And that's why I was really very interested in saying that let's maintain an open mind. Let's bring in science, because I remember in most of our dialogues, we talk about religion and science are not antipodes. They are not opposing each other. Religion and science can work hand in hand. So let's use scientific ideas also to promote oneness in the world, to promote the idea of one race. Let's also use African spirituality to ground our development, whether you're talking about peace, whether you're talking about politics. Let's also integrate how Africans perceive their world, how they perceive their cosmos. So I'm so happy, Mr. Chairman, to have been given a chance to make those few remarks. Thank you so much. And I really wish you a very fruitful conversation. I'm delighted to see the quality of the panelists, and I'm sure we are going to have very, very exciting presentations today. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And you are most welcome again. I should have added that Professor Iraqi is a professor of French at USIU, a Knight of Academic Palms, France.
Yes,
and he's chairman of the Harmony Institute. Thank you very much for setting the stage.
Yes,
and we are glad that we chose you to set the stage for us today.
Thank you.
If I may proceed, I will. If I may proceed, I will give a background of our discussion today. As we are all aware, His Holiness Pope Francis began his notable encyclical with a headline which summarized the current world affairs, and I quote, as dark clouds over the world, unquote. And at the first chapter of the encyclical, he gave examples of various threats to humanity and politics of the future. As we are surrounded by armed groups and conflicts, it is clear that the challenge to humanity is evident in the existence of weapons of mass destruction, provocative social media accounts, fake news, corruption, and so on. Therefore, during this conference, we will be working on the current affairs of the world at large, and Africa in particular, in order to draw a holistic picture of the issues that surround us and connect them in the light of Fratelli Tutti. The particular challenges facing Africa range from ethnic divisions, resource conflicts, through to intra and interstate conflicts. Military coups are still in vogue, as witnessed recently in Chad and Mali, the Tigrayan issue in Ethiopia with the involvement of Eritrea, political tensions in Somalia, and resource issues in South Sudan, the flare-up of the Mozambique resource conflict, and the resilience of Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. This is made worse by big power involvement, such as USA, Russia, France, UK, and of late, the Gulf states. These conflicts have led to humanitarian crisis, with thousands of displaced people seeking refuge in neighboring countries. This has put a strain on countries' resources and infrastructure, as they need help to provide for the influx of refugees. Our continent is further plagued by corruption, uprisings, and coups. In the North African region, for example, it has been over a decade since the Arab Spring that started out in Tunisia before it spread to the rest of the Arab world. Now, 10 years on, an analyst will ask if the uprising was worth it. Did it spark the desired change, or did it create an economic and political decline in the affected countries? An example is Libya. After the death of dictator Muammar Gaddafi, Libya, which was an oil-rich country, collapsed and split the once united country into two opposing regions. However, some countries fared well after the Arab Spring and were able to maintain stability as they transitioned into a new democratically elected regime for the first time in decades. In the last few years, there have also been shifts in alliances where countries that have been historically locked in conflict are beginning to come together and work to improve conditions in their respective regions. As late as this week, we've seen Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, and Eritrea come together at presidential level. Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Sudan also have recently formed a strategic alliance to resolve long-standing conflicts and promote regional economic development. These could, however, potentially undermine the regional organizations such as the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, and the African Union itself. We must also pay attention to China's growing influence in Africa, which has raised concerns among some countries and international organizations. They are concerned about its lack of transparency or her lack of transparency and accountability, and the potential for negative impacts on human rights, governance, and the environment. Great powers such as the US and France have also been critical of China's engagement in Africa, with some accusing China of engaging in neocolonialism and seeking to exploit Africa's resources for its gain. China, on its part, responds in a more negative way and accuses the West of exploiting Africa for centuries and centuries. One of the main issues is China's loan practices in Africa, which many argue are predatory and have the potential to create debt dependency. This is a sticking point which appears to create a competition between China and the West. However, outside of regional power dynamics, the global megatrend of climate change will bring about new conflicts, which are addressed in Fratelli Tutti 2. Global solidarity as a concept to counter unmitigated dimension issues probably needs to be considered as the answer. So what is the guiding question for our discussion today? And I would posit that the guiding question is, what is the complementarity between religion and politics in Africa, and how does Fratelli Tutti address this issue? Now, to guide our discussion on the subject, I will now ask for the video to be played. It's shorter than 5 minutes, and then we proceed with the rest of the discussion. Thank you very much.
My name is Dr. Irungu Kangata. I teach at Catholic University of East Africa. I'm also the governor for Murang'a County. And before that, I was a senator. And before that, a member of parliament. Before that, a councillor. And before that, I was a student leader. Currently, Africa is experiencing the growth and also the reversal of democracy. We have seen elections, which seems to be consolidated democracy in countries like Kenya and Ghana. But we have also seen democratic reversals, like in Sudan, in Egypt, in Tunisia, and several military coups. We thought military coups were done, but we have seen a return of military coups in Burkina Faso, Mali, and such countries. And also, Africa is currently experiencing poverty, increase of poverty. Even where it is reducing, other countries are progressing faster than Africa. Climate change is currently bedeviling and impacting Africa more, and therefore we need to think a little bit harder on how to address these issues in Africa. One of the ways to do so is to elect more ethical leaders, more God-fearing leaders. We also need to fight for democracy and the expansion of democracy. Yes, religion plays a very important role in terms of mobilizing people to some metaphysical being and also to ethical leadership. And to that extent, as a Catholic and also as a believer, I strongly believe that religion is a force for good, And definitely politics, if it was to be leaned towards religion, there will be progress in humanity. Yes, human rights were originally conceived by Catholic theologians, in particular Summa Theologica by St. Thomas of Aquinas. And I think if we were to protect and embed human rights in Africa, there will be progress, in particular the right to life, the right to food, the right to economic and social and political rights. The economic orthodoxy seems to suggest that we measure wealth using what we call gross domestic product. The problem with that, it misses key human dimension to development, like life expectancy, health indicators, and therefore Murang'a County is really moving more towards measuring development from a human development index point of view. And one of the key indicators of human development index is healthcare. We are inputting a lot of resources to boost healthcare in our county. Yes, the Bible talks about the story of the Good Samaritan, where you extend your love to a person who is not from your tribe, from your religion, and you tolerate all kinds of religion. Therefore, as Christians, we have to champion that ethic. We love everyone without discriminating on the basis of religion or where that person comes from.
We thank that recording by Dr. Erum Kangata. He has introduced himself, but I would like to add that he is a Kenyan politician. He is the governor of Murang'a County, as he stated, a former senator also from Murang'a, and a former majority whip in the Senate. Before that, he was the member of parliament for Kiharu constituency and a councillor in the central ward of Murang'a town. He is a graduate in law from the University of Nairobi and a principal in the firm Irungu Kangata and Company, and advocates located within my Upper Hill, Nairobi area. He, of course, holds a PhD in law, University of Nairobi, and as he said, he teaches at the Catholic University. And as we have heard from his recording, he's in agreement with Professor Iraki that religion has a role to play in taking Africa forward. And it is very closely related with politics, and the two can join hands to advance positive human development. We thank them both. May I now invite Dr. Zolani Sakuba. Dr. Zolani Sakuba teaches in the areas of religion and theology at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Pietermaritzburg in South Africa. His areas of specialization include systematics, theology, and religion, and conflict. Dr. Sakuba has a special interest in the nature of an existing intersectionality between religion, truth, and entitlement. It's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Sakuba. The floor is yours, Dr.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Greetings from South Africa. I hope that my audio is clear enough. Am I audible enough, colleagues?
I think we can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you very much.
At least then we can hear you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this very, very important platform. I feel really, really honored. As the general said in the introduction, I teach primarily in the area of systematics theology, as well as in the area of religion. And in the area of religion, the part that I'm quite fascinated with is the one that involves religion and conflict. How does religion either contributes to conflict, or how religion can also be a solution, can serve to be a deterrent to conflict. That is the area that I am involved in at the moment. So in my presentation, one of the things that you will immediately notice is that my systematics theology background and my background in this particular topic that I'm quite interested in will come together. So in my presentation today, what I want to share with you today, colleagues, I want to do some reflection on how to deal with conflict or violence of vulnerability. Or let me put it differently, how to deal with the violence of the vulnerable. So if you're listening to that, there is I'm sort of presenting a paradox there, in the sense that I'm talking about the violence of the vulnerable. Or if you like, you can think of how do we, in an effort to address issues of political violence, issues of conflict that emanate from divisions that are coming from, that are emanating from politics. How do we deal with the dark side of vulnerability? I'll just unpack that. How do we deal with that within a context of political tensions? So how do we find a balance between handling frustration? You will understand that wherever there is conflict of any sort, where there is conflict of any sort, conflict also generates some degree or levels of frustration, especially for those who are at the receiving end of the not so beautiful side of conflict. So how do we balance between handling frustration and managing to have empathy at the same time? In other words, when I am wronged or when I witness a situation that makes me hot under the collar, a situation that frustrates me, that takes my levels of frustration to the highest level, how do I deal with that with compassion? Because in any area of conflict resolution, if religion or religious leaders, for an example, are to be able to make a meaningful impact in terms of addressing conflict, in terms of addressing violence, whether that violence is institutional violence, whether it is a brute form of violence, whether it is a psychological form of violence, for religious leaders and for religion to be able to do that, there is a quality that is indispensable. There is a quality that religious leaders or religious institutions cannot afford not to have, and that quality is compassion. So to do that, I will quickly then look at, I will just briefly talk about vulnerability. And my first reflection is on vulnerability as a common or a universal feature of the human condition. Vulnerability is a universal feature of the human condition. In other words, vulnerable people, remember I'm talking about vulnerability now, but I will later talk about the violence of vulnerability, just in case you want to make some connections as to why I'm talking about vulnerability. I'm talking about vulnerability because I want to also talk about the violent nature of vulnerability. Now, vulnerability cuts across all racial divides, all racial divides. People of all races across the world do experience various degrees of vulnerability. Vulnerability cuts across all ideological divides. So it doesn't matter, if I were to use a secular language, it doesn't matter if you are a communist, you are a socialist, it doesn't matter if you are a leftist, it doesn't matter if you are a far-right political leader. From time to time, you do experience vulnerability. Vulnerability also cuts across religious traditions. So it doesn't matter if you are a Christian, it doesn't matter if you are a Muslim, it doesn't matter if you are a Hindu or a Buddhist. From time to time, you will experience vulnerability. You will experience vulnerability as a person, as a community, as a nation. You will experience vulnerability as a tradition in its entirety. Vulnerability also cuts across all class divides. So it does not matter whether you are a member of an upper class. In other words, you have a monopoly on the means of production of any sort. It doesn't matter whether you are a member of the middle class, you belong to the middle class. It does not matter whether you belong to the working class. From time to time, you will experience levels of vulnerability. It cuts across gender. It doesn't matter if you are a woman, you will be vulnerable. If you are a man, you will be vulnerable. From time to time, we are made to understand that, to think that men are vulnerable, men are not vulnerable, or rather men are immune from vulnerability. But we all experience vulnerability from time to time. And remember, once again, I want to remind you of what I said earlier. Vulnerability of all sorts is inherently violent. So I can go on and on about the universality of vulnerability. I can mention how vulnerability affects even wealthier nations. America, sometimes some people do not understand how it is that America can be so violent. We all know some of the questionable actions of America. My colleague earlier spoke about Libya. We all know the actions of America in Libya. We all know historically the actions of America in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and all of that. Whether we like it or not, that is a form of violence. But if you trace that form of violence or those conflicts, it will take you back to one area, and that area is vulnerability. Countries, all nations of the world have got one feature that is common amongst all of them, and that feature is the armed forces, to protect the interest of a nation and to protect and ensure the safety of the nation. Why is that? It is because of vulnerability, because all nations are vulnerable, and vulnerability pervades. It cuts across all of these areas that I've talked about. Now I want to move to the last segment of my presentation today and talk about and reflect on vulnerability as a natural reaction. Vulnerability that I have just talked about, which I said is universal, is a natural reaction to what I would call given reality. It is a natural reflection to given reality, or you may want, if you like, you may think of given reality as a presently presenting dimension of reality, a presently presenting dimension of reality. That is what vulnerability reacts to. When you are vulnerable, I guess, let me just unpack that a little bit. When I am experiencing vulnerability, that experience is not baseless. That experience is based on a prior action, and that prior action could be an outside stimulus that has brought about the feelings of being vulnerable. And once I am vulnerable, vulnerability also signals to me that I am under siege. I am under a state of things are not going well. Then once I feel that I'm not going well, things are not going well, I definitely need to react to that. Okay, so vulnerability is a reaction to given reality. Now let me just talk a little bit about the nature of given reality. What is the nature of given reality? Given reality is a historical phenomenon. In other words, the reality that I'm confronted with presently, all the realities, the circumstances that I'm presented with presently have got a historical dimension to them. That reality has got a historical dimension to it. In other words, that reality is an outcome of a string of correlational relationships between actions and reaction, between causal effect and between cause and effect. So once again, borrowing from what my colleague had said earlier, if we were to use scientific means to understand this, we would know that things that are just in front of us did not just get there. Circumstances that are in front of us did not just get there. Situations and political dispensations that are in front of us did not just get there. They have got a historical dimension, and that historical dimension can be traceable in terms of what happened and what happened translate to. So there is a cause and effect. Given reality now, this part is quite crucial for me, because now it helps me to tie this up with the whole issue of the violence of vulnerability. Given reality produces vulnerability. Every given reality produces vulnerability. When I give birth to my children, and my children grow up in my own homestead, in my home, when they grow up in my home, they find a system that is well-oiled in my home. They find a system that is running, and that system that they find, in my view, as a parent, as someone who gave birth to them, there is nothing wrong with that system. But for my children, especially this comes out when my children are teenagers, they will rebel against the system that I have put in place. Why? Because that system is not their system, it is my system. So immediately, that situation produces vulnerability to them. So given reality generates vulnerability. In other words, given reality, or reality that we inherit, whether it's culture, as human beings, as Africans, we inherit cultures that have been handed over I understand that in most cases we speak in a very beautifully about our cultures, which our ancestors have handed over to us. But sometimes those cultures do generate some degree of vulnerability. So given reality can be a life denying inevitability. Given reality can be a life denying inevitability, but given reality can also be a transformative opportunity. Why is it that given reality can be a transformative opportunity? It is because given reality also serves as a new material. And out of that new material, those who inherit that reality that they've been given can actually carve their own path. They can use that as a raw material to generate their own reality. Given reality is a comfort zone for some. So people who have been sponsoring a particular political dispensation and all of that tend to be comfortable. As a result, they would not want any tampering with that which they wish to hand over to the next generation or to other people. So given reality can be a stubborn challenge. Given reality is a violent phenomenon. It is a violent phenomenon. It is also a provocative phenomenon. Now, let me just conclude then by saying, what is the significance of never forgetting to appreciate the role and place of vulnerability, all the vulnerability that I've talked about in a political dispensation? Why is it that it is important? Why is it important for religious leaders who are in the business of wanting to effect change? Why is that? Right? Now, political dispensations all over the world, including the ones that are reigning now, are forms of given reality. I just want to touch on that quickly. Political dispensations are forms of given reality. A political dispensation, just like given reality, is a historical phenomenon. It is a string of correlational relationship. In other words, we did not just get here. With the political dispensation that you colleagues have in Kenya at the moment, it did not just land like that. It is a culmination with the political climate of the entire African continent, with all of its good, the bad, and the ugly. It is something that is a culmination of a long history of cause and effect, right? Like given reality, all political dispensations are life denying, but they are also transformative. They also present opportunities for transformation as well. Why? Because all of these political dispensations present a new or raw material for people who have inherited them. These political dispensations are comfort zones for those who are sitting at the helm of those political dispensations. And as comfort zones for those people who are sitting at the helm, they would hold on. The holding on to that comfort zone is also a manifestation or an expression of vulnerability, because they wonder, should we let go, what will happen to us? There is vulnerability. And that vulnerability can generate conflict, and it can generate violence, right? So politicians can be stubborn, and these political dispensations can generate further violence and further vulnerability. In all of this, someone who is vulnerable can also be easily provoked, even where there was no necessity to be provoked. So political dispensations, as we understand them, as we see them, whether that political dispensation is in well-developed democracies, in America, in Norway, in Canada, in all of these celebrated democracies, but those dispensations have got one thing in common. They are manifestations of narratives of vulnerability. Now, where is the place of empathy? Remember, at the beginning, I was saying, how do you balance frustration? So if we look at given reality, it generates frustration. There's something frustrating about given reality. If I'm located somewhere in the Middle East, the geopolitical texture of the Middle East will always generate frustration for some on both sides of the divide. If you are in America, the same thing. If you are in Eastern Europe, where we see the current war between Russia and Ukraine, what we see there is a manifestation of vulnerability. That vulnerability is being expressed by the Russians in as much as it is expressed by the Ukrainians. But in all of that, in dealing with frustration, there is always a space for empathy. This is where religion, in my view, comes in. This is where the contribution of religious leaders comes in quite strongly. Now, but to understand this also involves to understand what empathy is. Empathy is coming to terms with one's self. Empathy is coming to terms with yourself. So when I say I am experiencing empathy, it simply means that I have come to terms with myself. In another, I saw and encountered myself in another. The other person's pain became my pain. I discovered my pain embodied in someone else. So empathy, if you like, is a form of incarnation, right? In the sense that empathy is a state of being alive, embodied in the other. Empathy, if that is true of empathy, then empathy is a precondition. It is that condition that is so strongly required for sincere experiential learning. Experiential learning now involves listening, experiential listening. Let me correct myself. Empathy is a precondition for a sincere experiential listening. Experiential listening means that I do not listen with my ears. I listen with my experience, because the listening that I go through is through an embodied presence in the other. It is through an embodied presence in the other, right? So what is empathy? Empathy can be described as pilgrimage to myself. Empathy can be described as pilgrimage to myself. In other words, when I experience empathy, I can only experience empathy when I have taken journey. Now, this journey is quite interesting in the sense that it looks like I move out of myself. So there is a paradox here in the sense that I move out of myself to come to myself. I move out of myself to come to myself. That is what empathy is. It is a pilgrimage to myself. So empathy is a pastoral ministry. Empathy is about a window towards ministering to myself. It is a window towards ministering to myself. When we listen to this, there is a very strong connection here between empathy and mission. Empathy and mission. It means going away to come to myself. So empathy is a selfless self-preservation. So if I experience empathy for someone else, the other someone else there, it means that I am acting selflessly, because I would be in a process of understanding the situation and the circumstances of another person. So I'm acting selflessly, whilst at the same time, I am preserving myself. So here it is in empathy that we see the coming together of selfishness and selflessness. It is in empathy. So in closing, I would argue that perhaps the only way that religious communities and religious leaders, as religious representatives, we can deal better with conflicts that we see, is not to ignore the frustration, because there are frustrating things that are rationally inexplicable, things we cannot explain that frustrates us. But at the same time, that in and of itself, frustration in and of itself, cannot be an end in itself. It requires empathy. And in that process of empathy, it is through that we would be able to discover the vulnerability of the violent, the vulnerability of the violent. It is through that process that we would understand how an extremely violent person, or someone who comes across as extremely heartless, is also a personification of the vulnerable human being, vulnerability which cuts across all racial divides, class divides, creedal divide, and so on and so forth. I will leave it there. Hopefully, my presentation will generate some questions as we go with the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zolani. That was quite a presentation, very impressive, I must say, where you mentioned about vulnerability and empathy, and you tried to link religion and politics combined, playing a positive role in reducing frustration. And of course, you have emphasized on the historical perspective of that frustration, and the ministry, the importance of understanding that empathy in ministering to the religious flock. And I believe by that you mean that religion has something to offer to politics as a complementary measure. Thank you very much. May I now welcome, I don't see her. Huh? Not Rahma, but yeah, she's not there yet. Yeah. Okay. May I now invite Professor Samuel Nyanchoga. Professor Nyanchoga is the Director of Research and Innovation at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Professor Samuel Alfayo Nyanchoga holds a BA honors, University of Nairobi, and MA history from the same university, and attained his PhD from Kenyatta University. He's a Fulbright scholar of Boston College, USA, and is the Director of Research and former Dean, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. He has also served as Director of the Institute for Regional Integration and Development, Director of Academic Programs, and Head of the History Department. He has served as a member of the Strategic Planning Committee, member of the University Senate Investment Committee, and published widely both locally and internationally. Professor Nyanchoga also attended many international and local academic conferences. His research focus is on gender, conflict, peace studies, historical and political processes in Africa. Most welcome, Professor. The floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bashir, for that elaborate introduction. And thank you, the organizers, for giving me the opportunity to make a presentation on religion and politics in Africa in the context of Fratelli Tutti. Allow me to give a contextual analysis of Africa. It may not be very exhaustive, but I'll try by giving, first of all, a contextual analysis of Africa between religion and politics. And then my second part of the presentation will focus on the relevance of Fratelli Tutti in the context of African religion and politics. It's very true that religion can be and has been an agent of social transformation in Africa. We cannot separate religion from politics and the influence of religion on politics and the politics on religion. Even when we try to historicize these two processes in Africa, even during the period of, pre-colonial African societies, colonial societies, and the post-colonial, we have seen that there is a nexus between religion and politics. Now, given the context of where Africa has come from, then how do we ensure that religion becomes the transformative agent given the contextual African situation? Allow me to give a situational analysis of Africa. Africa is characterized by what one might consider as direct and indirect impact of political violence and insecurity of communities. The most vulnerable of the African societies, including women and girls, that are directly affected by violence and insecurity. Violent conflicts are both physical and emotional consequences. In fact, conflict analysis in Africa now reveals an increasing militarization, widening horizontal and vertical inequality, sexual and gender-based violence, politicization, and even the feminization of poverty. As if that is enough, there is an increasing African human vulnerability. For example, if you look at the Nile Basin region, some of these countries like Burundi, Rwanda, Sudan, South Sudan, and Uganda, just to mention a few, have experienced varied, intractable conflicts and political instability. These instabilities have very complex geopolitical scenarios. There is also transnational threats across the African continent that vary from infectious diseases, global crime, cyber attacks, ethnic violence, women proliferation, environmental degradation, drug trafficking, migrant smuggling, terrorism, and even corruption. We also experience structural conflict and structural violence that is institutionalized in our governance systems and is rarely addressed by our legal frameworks and religion across the continent. Violent extremist groups that have transformed traditional and cultural practices and fostered ideas and actions that foment social tension, intolerance, strained relationship between communities and even the state. And therefore, they occupy an important space in the context of Africa. Take an example of the Horn of Africa, countries of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia. Look at the Sahel region itself, Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Chad, and Sudan. An example of Somalia, it's a situation where you have a civil war that disintegrated the nation. Somalia, still a country of Muslim clans, 90% of the population that is Islamic. Look at Niger, where Islam is the most important religion. Look at Chad, okay? And then you look at Nigeria, look at Mauritania, look at Senegal, okay? Look at Burkina Faso and many other countries where violence sometimes is perceived as acceptable, necessary, and even desirable, where people express radical viewpoints in order to achieve their own goals. Some may argue it's because of weak governance that religious institutions have become easy targets for violent extremism. Radicalization is also on the rise across various, religious divides. There is also mental manipulation through religion into violence. Religion has become an important agent of political mobilization in Africa. We have witnessed across Africa, particularly during the times of electoral politics, where the religious clergy sometimes get muddled into tribal-based politics, rather than harnessing possibly religion to enable Africa to transcend ethnicity and use religion as units of political change. Religion across Africa has become an organizational base for political mobilization and really continues to shape the outcome of politics, particularly electoral politics in Africa. Religion has been used to incentivize the population to register, to vote. Religious institutions have allowed, their institutions to be the centers for the distribution of the voting guides, and sometimes even for the voting centers. There is also an increasing use of biblical imagery and metaphors in politics, where politicians, refer to themselves as the Joshuas that can be able to liberate people from dictatorial tendencies that characterize African political processes. Largely, therefore, religious organizations have become the meeting points of the large numbers of people, for political sanctification and also the legitimacy of political actors. This is the scenario that we find in Africa. So, religion and politics in Africa, what are the contesting issues? What are the contesting issues? In fact, when we talk of religion, whose religion and what religion are we talking about in Africa? Is religion in Africa is religion liberating Africa? Is there a religious liberating ideology of Africa for Africans? What is the role of the interfaith dialogue in enhancing not just peace, but positive peace, transformative peace in Africa? How is religion used in Africa? Is religion becoming an enterprise? Is Africa multinationalizing religion? Is religion addressing critical issues in Africa of bad governance, structural inequality, structural injustice, global inequality, massive exploitation of Africa and its resources? If Karl Marx were living in Africa today, how would he describe the religious dimensions in Africa? Would he look at religion as simply addressing the exterior issues rather than focusing on the critical issues that would be there for Africa? Have we multinationalized religion in Africa? And if we have multinationalized the religion and the religious institutions, how can then religion address the structural injustice and protect the vulnerable? Is Africa and African civil and religious leaders using, exploiting, and applying religion and religious doctrine for the positive transformation of Africa? For me, these are some of the critical issues that really we need to address when we are talking of the nexus between religion and the politics in Africa. The unfortunate thing is that African religious values have less and less promoted a more inclusive, a more equitable, and a just society for the dignity of the African people. Now, looking at Fratelli Tutti and African religious values and politics, the emphasis is on the importance of solidarity, fraternity, and social friendship among all people, regardless of religion, ethnicity, or political affiliation. In the context of African religion and politics, the encyclical promotes the idea that people of different religions and political backgrounds can come together and work for the common good of Africa, building bridges of understanding and cooperation between religions, and therefore mandating the religious leaders to promote peace, justice, and respect for the human dignity, and call for the dialogue between communities to address the challenges and promote the social harmony. While this is really timely for Africa, in fact, the political geography, when you take a political geography of Africa, from Central Africa, to West Africa, to North Africa, a number of challenges that were really mentioned at the very beginning by the chair of this particular session really raises a number of issues. is religion at the forefront of addressing these issues? Or is religion really becoming an exterior, addressing, the exterior issues of Africa? Fratelli argues that the transformative impact of African politics can be enhanced through dialogue, encouraging dialogue and cooperation among people of different political ideologies and religious values. And we would like to see, the enhancement of an interfaith dialogue that really looks at these issues in order to reduce the polarization that exists in Africa. The polarization in Africa really takes several, trajectories. There is a religious polarization. There is an ethnic polarization. Okay, there is a regional polarization of Africa. And these are some of the issues, therefore, really we've been told that we needed to address. The concept of solidarity emphasizes on social friendship to inspire political leaders to prioritize on the common good and work together to address the challenges facing the African communities and African countries. The concept of solidarity is actually embedded on African mutualism. African mutualism focuses on the creation of egalitarian societies, creating of social justice societies, whereby there is, equitable distribution of resources in order to minimize the escalated, structural divisions that exist in Africa. And really, it is important that this should be enhanced in Africa. And in fact, it's important that the African leaders, both religious and civil leaders, get to look at the concept of African mutualism, which is extremely important in dealing with these issues. The third area that I found that will be extremely important is on the issue of the respect of the human person, irrespective of their background, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their station in life. This message is extremely important. We need to promote human rights and social justice in African politics. The unfortunate thing is that African politics is predatory. African politics is ethnicized. African politics is really exploitative to the extent that really African politics is very superficial. It really does not address the structural challenges that are facing Africa. African politics is no longer emancipatory. It does not emancipate people, from the quagmire of poverty, from the quagmire of escalated, issues of class inequality. It continues, to magnify all these, glaring inequalities in Africa. And therefore, this should be addressed. The other issue is really focusing on the religious leaders across all religions. What is the role of religious leaders across all religions in promoting peace? And when we are talking of peace here, we are not looking at, peace in the context of national security. There is a misconception that when we have the absence of violence, then a country is peaceful. That is a misconception. The concept of peace goes beyond physical violence to address emotional, to address spiritual issues. And this is where our, religious leaders need to come in, and advocate for a transformative peace of the African continent by looking at issues of justice, respect of the human person, raising awareness on social and political issues that really are creating contours of injustice, divisions, and poverty in African political processes. Overall, the Fratelli Tutti has the potential to inspire a new cooperation and collaboration in African politics across regions, whereas we agree that the umbrella, continental body, the African Union, plays a very important role in promoting the unity of Africa. It's important that the political leaders of Africa get to understand the key ingredients that I founded, particularly on Fratelli Tutti, whereby the unity of Africa must really focus on the common good of the African person. It must be able to promote a universal unity, a social friendship, addressing issues of globalization, migration, inequality, and the need for unity of Africa. We must have a deep understanding and respect of the diversity of our cultures, the diversity of our beliefs, the diversity of our values, because as a continent, we can only be able to enjoy positive peace if we understand and respect our diversity. In many African societies, really religion plays a very significant role in shaping the political landscape and informing political decisions. We cannot ignore this. And it could be important that, Africans realign African religious values. As I said from the beginning, whose religion and whose values are we promoting in religion? We must align our religious values by creating inclusive and equitable societies, by also looking back into the mutuality of the African society and embrace them as Africa moves forward. The message of Fratelli Tutti is particularly important in Africa today. Why is it important? Because it addresses the critical issues of conflict, of poverty and inequality that really bedevils Africa. In fact, we can argue that the encyclical promotes a new global order. And this is what, if there is anything that we need to borrow from this, then it is the concept of a new global order, whereby we have a mutual respect and understanding that people have to work together. We have to work together to build a just and sustainable international community. In concluding my remarks, I will say that African religion and politics, they share a commitment in promoting peace, justice, and the dignity of all people. By embracing these principles and social friendship, it becomes a source of hope and inspiration for Africa to create a better continent. Thank you very much for listening to me. Those are the comments I had, and I will invite more insights as the discussion continues.
Thank you very much, Professor. That is Professor Sam Nyanchoga. A very elaborate, very deep presentation, and has brought out really the gist of the encyclical, which aims to promote a new global order. And of course, African mutuality and realigning our priorities. And also reforming the political thought in Africa so that it's more transformative. The professor has clearly brought out that our politics are stuck in the past in the colonial period. We have borrowed the colonial model of politics, and we are still stuck in that same location. So Fratelli Tutti, which is advanced by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed Al-Tayyib, spans across the world religions and advocates for total overhaul, a total transformation, and not a change, but a social kind of transformation. Thank you very much, Professor, for your educated and elaborate insight into religion and politics, which was our subject for today.
Thank you, sir.
I would like now to invite Rahma Ghulam Abbas. Rahma Ghulam Abbas is a female Muslim who resides at the coast of Kenya. She has worked on promoting and protecting human rights and civil liberties for the last 15 years. She is the founder and CEO of Muslim Women Advancement of Rights and Protection. Before her current engagement, she was the Deputy Executive Director of Muslims for Human Rights, Muhuri, where she worked for 13 years. Her passion for a just society for women and girls led to the founding of MWAP in 2019. And the vision and mission is that of a just society where women and girls realize, embrace, and enjoy their full rights and dignity to actualize and advance women's and girls' social, economic, legal, and civil rights, respectively. Rahma holds a bachelor's degree in arts and social sciences, but specializes in finance for her master's degree. It's now my pleasure to invite Rahma to present to us. Rahma, the floor is yours, please. Rahma, can you hear me? Yeah, please go ahead.
And thank you much, organizers. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you a bit. You are breaking. She's gone. Hello, Rahma, can you hear us? While we are waiting for Rahma to sort out the electronic bit of her presentation, we have a few questions. And the first one is for you to consider in the meantime. One is to, oh, Rahma is back.
Yes, sorry.
Rahma,
I think there is a internet, my internet is quite unstable. I'm sorry for that.
now you are quite, proceed.
Okay, thanks. So as I said, I'm honored to be part of the presenters today in today's meeting. And I'm going, as per the introduction, I will also focus more on human rights, what human rights play the critical role in shaping the political landscape. But before that, I just want to give a small analysis of what is politics, and according to the encyclical Fratelli Tutti. So for me, I'd like to define politics in the layman's language. These are activities that are associated with governance of a country or an area. And according to Pope Francis in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, he expresses that these are inalienable supreme dignity of human beings, of each human person, regardless of origin, race, or religion, and the supreme law of fraternal love, without being an unreachable ideal. Fraternity guides us in examining our personal and social lives and points to what humankind should strive to pursue. Hence, fraternity appropriately should inform political life, and in particular, a better kind of politics, one truly at the service of the common good. Pope Francis prophetically and courageously urges us to renew our political engagement, caring for the most vulnerable, respecting different cultures. Moreover, he longs for political leaders who truly inspire, unite, and lead us, who stimulate political arrangements, compromises, and solutions that promote personal and social flourish, improving the quality of life of humankind and protect the earth. According to Pope Francis, again, he says 3 dimensions characterize the political life that we need. First, he talks about social and political clarity while fostering social charity and openness to everyone, trusting in the reserves of goodness present in human hearts. Secondly, Pope Francis talks about politics should promote political love. And thirdly, politics should be fruitful and achieve results. In this threefold, the proposals we can recognize the approach that inform liberation theory to judge, to see, and act. And then I want to talk briefly about the religious institutions in Africa. Religious institutions have often played an integral part of the fabric of communities across the globe. In addition to their aims of providing spiritual and moral guidance, faith communities sometimes offer their members and larger community needed resources, for example, schools, health clinics, food, meeting spaces, children activities, and support groups. Religion has continued to play an important role in Africa. From a research that was conducted in February 2020, a survey of 34 countries showed that Africa trusts religious leaders more than politicians. For instance, in Nigeria, religion is ingrained in Nigerians' national identity, with 46.9% of the population identify themselves as Christians and 51.1% identifying themselves as Muslims. Moreover, in a country where a third of its adults population is illiterate, that is Nigeria, and where only 46 have internet access, religious leaders remain crucial in the transmission of information. Many Africans are more likely to listen and believe in the words of their religious leaders than government leaders, given the general lack of trust between the citizens and the political elites. I will go into my presentation on giving the different examples where religious institutions, because for me, I feel civil society organizations, religious institutions fall broadly under the category of civil society organizations, and how they can complement each other with a focus on the Fratelli Tutti. For example, under the Catholic Church in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which historically has played a role in denouncing the abuses of the successive governments dating from 1960, several archbishops up to now have at all, to varying degrees, stood up to political power by demanding justice and democracy. For instance, looking at the civil society, faith-based organizations, NGOs, in a recent example in Kenya, the NGOs have been rallying up and calling for justice of the human rights defenders and lawyers, such as Willie Kimani, the late Willie Kimani, Elizabeth Ibrahim Ekaru, who was an environmental activist killed last year, and Edwin Chiloba, among others, by ensuring speedy justice for the murdered and formulation of policies that will protect the human rights defenders in their vital work. In the Central African Republic, in DRC, Kenya, and among other African countries, religious leaders and religious institutions have played a critical role during elections. For example, some religious institutions have fronted their candidates, while others, the candidates have gone to religious institutions for validation, stroke endorsement, and support for their candidature. This therefore gives such institutions a platform to critique and endorse politicians that serve humanity if the religious institutions are to be guided by the Fratelli Tutti. Presidential and other elective positions create high tension and spikes of violence. It is the religious institutions and leaders, together with human rights organizations such as MOAP, that have been on the front line on efforts to calm tension during the pre, during, and post-election. Organizations like MOAP have conducted mass civic education, partnered with EIBC in mass voter registration to ensure those that are farthest at reach. Organizations like MOAC again has organized leadership training for women candidates, linked them with other organizations for capacity building. This has helped to ensure more women are confident to engage in politics, either as voters or candidates. Election observation, which organization like MOAP has been, which has been accredited, ensures that election process is monitored and documented, aimed at ensuring that the future elections learn from the previous elections. Last year, for instance, in October 2022, religious leaders advocated for debt relief for African countries ahead of the G20 summit in November. African faith leaders have called on world leaders and African finance lenders to promote initiatives that help Africa emerge from debt crisis, while appealing to the removal of unpayable debts which sink countries in the continent into further poverty. For instance, to prevent future instances of debt crisis, the leaders suggested adopting responsible lending and borrowing rules and standards, including debt contracts, disclosures, and authorization. We have seen that a lot of civil society are up in arms asking for the contracts, especially for the SGR in Kenya, to be laid, because sometimes we feel that because those contracts are not openly disclosed, we feel that there are some deals that are not good. They also recommended that both the creditor and borrower countries have a responsibility in supporting compliance and with such standards through their own policies and laws. Finally, organizations have, civil society organizations have heightened that much needs to be done at the domestic public policy level to enhance confidence of citizens and improve domestic resource mobilization. They called on heads of states to improve governance by promoting transparency, inclusion, and accountability for public and natural resources, and stressed that the world is an urgent need of greater justice, both within national communities and at the international level. This is a great example of how religion can complement politics by ensuring that policies adopted serve humanity and are core for the most vulnerable. In Kenya, for instance, the prices of basic common commodities have gone up, which have been occasioned by the COVID-19, the Russian-Ukraine crisis, and the weakening shilling. Many CSOs have mobilized citizens and marched to the streets with placards. That was last year, Hakuna Kura Bila Kula, which called on government to lower food prices and basic commodity prices as a precondition for them to participate in the general election 2022. This therefore became a manifesto in the Kenyan Kwanza Alliance, which won. During the pandemic, such as the recent COVID-19, MOAP together with other human rights organizations have used their platform to create awareness on the importance and adherence to government policies, such as restriction on movement, social distancing, and why the places of worship have been closed. Similarly, the same organizations were actively involved in the distribution of protective devices, protective equipment such as masks, demystifying rumors, and providing correct information, especially on overcoming vaccine hesitancy and building confidence for vaccine. Use of the places of worship and civil society offices as COVID testing and vaccine centers, continuously advocating for the upholding of religious and human rights in the fight against the pandemic. Past the COVID, organizations like MWAP are looking at how the challenges, especially in the health sector, experienced can be addressed. This we are now doing through the involvement in the counties in the sectoral planning for the 2023-2032 and the county integrated development plans, which is 2023 to 2027, where we include priorities for the communities in these policy documents. NGOs, CSOs, faith-based organizations have a critical role to play in policy formulation. They advocate for policies that adhere to human rights-based approach. For instance, during COVID, the lockdowns saw a rise in sexual and gender-based violence across, saw a rise in sexual and gender-based violence cases. These have been documented and victims are assisted to seek justice. On the other hand, advocacy for the formulation of policies that will prevent such occurrences have also been ongoing, with some counties already developing gender policies while others still in the process. Such organizations have made inputs to several policies in Kenya. For instance, the recent example is the submission of memorandum on the ongoing police reforms in Kenya to the task force in order to contribute to a more human rights-based approach with the excessive misuse of police power and widespread human rights violations, including but not limited to extrajudicial killings and extrajudicial disappearances. CSOs also have been playing an important role in enhancing transparency and good governance by contributing to increased public debates on issues surrounding the formulation and implementation of government budgets, as well as supporting greater transparency on public resources and revenues. This is done through different ways, such as at MWAP, we do community scorecards, social accountability action, social audit, which enhances service delivery for the citizen. For example, under community scorecards, what is done, we look at, for example, a health facility. What number of doctors does it have? The number of patients that are served, the number of nurses. Then we look at the ideal standard. How many doctors are supposed to serve one patient? And then we do a report, have an interface meeting where we engage the stakeholders, that is the health department, including many others, where we discuss the findings of those reports and later come up with an action plan. For example, if we saw that there was gap in terms of equipment, there are many patients being transferred to, for example, in Lamu to Mombasa Coast General Hospital, then we find a solution where can we advocate to a budget for allocation of the equipment that are needed to do tests and treatment in that hospital. Moreover, CSOs play the work of CSOs, NGOs, and FBOs is also to complement the government by creating awareness on their rights, how to defend them, and the avenues for redress, and bridging the gap between communities and the government services, which are centrally placed. For instance, we have constitutional commissions mandated to handle human rights abuses from police, that is the Independent Police Oversight Authority, delay in government services such as Office of the Ombudsman, report human rights violations such as Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, among others. Therefore, MWAP, among other human rights organizations, create awareness on this and also helps to inform the public through the different avenues such as forums, radio talk shows on policies, and disseminating information about issues that affect them and the interest of the different groups or society at large, e.g. budgets, calendar cycle, and how they can engage. So for me, my presentation is more on how we can link the civil society, address, showing the complementarity between civil society and the politics. And I know for a long time, civil society have been called evil society because sometimes they've been in bad record with the government, but we can see how civil society play very important role in the society, just as the ones I have mentioned. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the plenary discussion.
Thank you very much, Rahma. And the internet has been kind to us. You've managed to be very, you've managed to convey your message very well. And in a very different way, actually, because you have tackled the issue at the grassroots level, centering on the role of community and the individual versus the role of government and the international community, especially finance institutions. And of course, you've gone broadly across the continent and tried to relate both religion and politics, which means you've really captured the theme of today's discussion. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, we do not have our fourth presenter with us, so we shall proceed with some of the questions that have been posed by our viewers. The first question is to who? To Professor Nyanchog. Okay, the first question is to Dr. Zolani. How can vulnerability be redirected to improve one's self-worth? How can vulnerability be redirected to improve one's self-worth? And to Professor Nyanchoga, how does the socio-political and economic principles promote fraternal coexistence among religions? How do the social, political, and economic principles promote fraternal coexistence among religions? Who is this other one directed to from Leon? Yeah, and the other one is universal to all the presenters. Is religion a new face of politics? We cannot separate religion from politics vis-a-vis what Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And another question for Professor Nyanchoga. What do you think of the current peace in Kenya? We just had the elections last year, and not everyone was satisfied. Do you think the religious leaders and the politicians come together to establish the positive peace? So these are the questions, and we can answer them in any sequence. And this one also is to the panel. What are the last question to the panel is, what are the practical ways through which collaboration can be promoted among the religious leaders, especially in an era characterized by individualism, tribalism, nationalism, among others? I'll repeat that question. What are the practical ways through which collaboration can be promoted among the religious leaders, especially in an era characterized by individualism, tribalism, nationalism, and other factors? We can go in any way. May I start with Professor Dr. Zolani, please.
Good morning once again, colleagues. I will first look at the question that was directed to myself, which is, how can vulnerability be redirected to improve one's self-worth? The way in which I will answer this question is by looking at what our I call the gift of vulnerability, the gift of vulnerability. And the gift of vulnerability may be understood in the following way. As human beings, we have time, we invest that time and energy on a number of things. But one of the areas where we invest a significant amount of time and a quality amount of attention is around those areas where we know that we are the weakest. I will make an example. If I have a lot of money, if I'm a wealthy person, I have a lot of money, that wealth also translates into some form of vulnerability. Why? Because if I lose that wealth, then that means that I would have lost something I have worked for the rest of my life. The same as power. Those with a lot of power, the more power you accumulate, the more vulnerable you become because of that power. Now, once you are vulnerable around a certain area, it could even be in the area of your health. If you are vulnerable because since childhood, you have had a problem with eyesight, or you have had a problem with hearing, that is where, as a human being, you invest the most energy, which then means that compared to someone who has got no problem with eyesight or no problem with hearing, you would have acquired special skills to deal with your vulnerability. So vulnerability is mostly seen or understood to be a curse, but vulnerability can also be a blessing in the sense that it helps us to generate unique skills to deal with certain challenges that we find ourselves in. So vulnerability of different kinds helps people who generate skills that are unique to the vulnerabilities that they are faced with. So that is the first question. For example, for communities that are in the arid areas, in the desert.
Maybe Prof, could I request you to move a bit quicker because of the time pressure?
Okay. Sure. Okay. So let me now come quickly to the second question. The second question is, what are the practical ways to promote collaboration in terms of in a world that is divided in many ways? My response to that question is actually quite straightforward. There is something called common good. As human beings, we all have common good. And that common good can be very basic in the sense that it all boils down to human fear of mortality. We all fear mortality and poverty, climate change, global geopolitical violence, and all of those things have got a direct bearing on that basic human fear, which is fear of mortality. So common good are those things that are useful to all human beings, and the only way to channel that, which the avenue the church has, is through ecumenism. So ecumenism and ecumenical bodies should be able to be quite useful in channeling ways of how different communities can collaborate, and that also translates into interreligious dialogue, interfaith dialogue. That is a division of ecumenism that is especially unique.
Thank you very much. Professor Nyanchoga, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe two issues. One of them is on fraternal principles that I founded in various religions. And, you know, fraternity refers to very universal principles. It doesn't, you know, focus on one specific religion. You know, issues of solidarity, social solidarity, social justice, mutual economies. These are principles that, you know, cut across religions, cut across races, that cut across, you know, the ethnic and political divide. And this is what we expect religions actually to capitalize on, so that they can be able to create trans-religious orders that, you know, are not limited to any particular religion. Now, on the issues of on the issues of the second question that really focused on Kenya, one of the things that we saw during the electoral politics and the days to the elections was the, you know, was the role that religious leaders actually played in, you know, in promoting peace and urging the leaders to accept, you know, the political outcomes, and if there were any form of contestations, to allow the law to prevail. But then beyond that, now we are seeing religious leaders really taking a back seat even when we are seeing political temperatures, political hate again rising in this country. We do expect that religious leaders should have to continue with the ecumenical spirit, creating interfaith dialogue, creating forums for the religious leaders. Why? Because we expect religion to be the mediating as well as the moderating role, especially when we have a political divide or when we have political contestations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that elaborate but quick intervention. May I ask Rahma, please, to respond?
Okay, thank you again, Bashir, for those questions. For me, I just want to say, like what Professor, I think Zolan, the doctor from South Africa, what he said. I think we need to focus on common good for all of us, and this we'll do through interreligious dialogue, because I believe that once all religions are focused on what is common among us.
Can you turn on your camera, please?
Can you see me?
Yes.
So if the interreligious, I'm handling the last question that was raised, what are the practical ways through which we can promote religion into issues of politics? So what I want to say is that we need to focus on what is common amongst all the religions, and then also focusing on issues of humanity. And therefore, if we look at issues of interreligious dialogue, but it should go beyond issues of if the absence, like what Professor Samuel has said, the absence of peace does not, or the absence of violence does not mean that there is peace. We need to go and interrogate more, and especially handle issues. The politics needs to handle issues that are common, especially for the poor who are the majority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahma, and all the panelists. This has been a very interesting discussion, and a very informative discussion. which is a very current discussion, actually, which is going on in Africa. And religion, the place of religion has been very well articulated in this discussion. It is up to the church, up to the Islamic practice, up to the other Abrahamic religion and African religions to stand up and come out and play their role in the development of the continent. Times are changing. We have to move away from the old perspectives to the new realities. And of course, Africa right now is under threat in the sense that there is a new interest emerging from other powers that will like to extract more resources, and especially in a softer way this time probably, but still the mission, their mission and vision remains the same, to exploit. So Africa has to be on its toes, it has to be awake to the current and the new realities of a world economy. Emerging powers such as China, the competition with the Western countries in Europe and the USA are posing a potential security threat to Africa. Internally, we have our own challenges that must also be addressed, and this came out very clearly in all the conversations we have had today. And probably even the internal ones are more painful to the communities and individuals living in the African continent today. So thank you very much to all our panelists. We are finishing on time, and that is very important. Please remember to submit your written copies to us, either in soft or hard copy, whichever you may please. Thank you very much. And may I thank you again on behalf of the organizers for a job well done. Have a nice day. Thank you.